Okay, good morning. We're holding chapter 26 in Tanya. So a brief introduction to chapter 26. We know it's a famous principle of Hasidism that it is extremely important to serve Hashem with joy, to be happy. And we know that generally speaking, historically, Hasidim were known as the Freilacha, the ones who are joyous, the ones who are happy. And we know that the Chachmei HaEmes, as the Alter Rebbe calls them in Igeres HaKodesh, they distance themselves very much from the characteristic of sadness and depression. And this is why the Baal Shem Tov established that distancing oneself and negating sadness is a critical component in serving Hashem with joy. And this is one of the fundamental principles of the ways of Hasidus. And it's told that the Alter Rebbe said in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that sadness or depression by Hasidim was considered to be an avera from the Torah. And it's also brought in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that in truth, sadness and worry and depression, this is the source for all negativity that exists in the world. And so that is why in Hasidus, the feelings of sadness and depression can be a gateway to all types of negativity. And so therefore, that's why great Hasidim will always invest effort to always be joyful and to serve Hashem with intense feelings and passion, and that's how they became known as the Freilacha. And so in this chapter 26, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain why this goal of serving Hashem with simcha has to be, and why we have to distance ourselves so much from the negative feelings of sadness and depression. Because through sadness and depression, one can ultimately fall into the trap of the Nefesh Bahamis and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, as it's going to be explained. Now, just to make a brief point over here, that from chapter 1 until chapter 25, the Alter Rebbe has pretty much laid down the full presentation on what he set out to explain. The Alter Rebbe set out to answer a question. The question the Alter Rebbe set out to explain is, how is it that the Torah describes the performance of the Torah with the appropriate feelings of awe and fear and love of Hashem is very near to every person. The Torah says that for it is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to do it. So the Alter Rebbe says that seemingly that is a very difficult verse to understand, for it does not seem to be easy, and it does not seem to be near for a person to, number one, follow all of the commandments, despite the challenges that come from within, despite having an evil inclination. And number two, even if one is able to be obedient and actually do what God asks, yet still it is difficult to charge those actions and infuse them with the appropriate feelings of love and fear of Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe sets out to explain to us how it is indeed possible to do that. And the Alter Rebbe explains this in two ways. One way is through a process called meditation and contemplation. The idea is that through a person choosing their thoughts and thinking about the creation of the world, the greatness of Hashem, and so on, one can artificially generate the appropriate feelings that one should have towards Hashem. And there, the Alter Rebbe lays down a principle of Mayich Shalat Alalev, that the mind has control over the heart naturally. And so therefore, not only can he control the reactions that he will have. So if a person, for example, is triggered to do something which is against Hashem, the mind can stop a person in its tracks and dictate to the person what the appropriate response should be according to Torah. But more than that, he says that the mind has the power to actually move away from the negative feelings that one may experience after a particular stimuli, after a particular experience, and create new feelings through meditating upon different ideas that can shift a person away. That's the idea of Moich Shalit al Halev. And through using this God-given ability, we can serve Hashem in the appropriate manner, not just being obedient, but also infusing our actions and our deeds with the appropriate feelings of love and awe of Hashem. However, the Alter Rebbe explains that that is one way, and that is something that is helpful and useful for people who are able to really understand ideas of greatness, of the greatness of Hashem, and they're able to have control over their thoughts for an extended period of time. But what about people who find it more difficult to have that kind of discipline over their minds and their thoughts? So the Alter Rebbe says that there is one other way that a person has a naturally inborn ability to be able to take control over their lives. And that is the principle that every Jew has a neshama, every Jew has a soul, and that soul is a part of Hashem, and that soul has within it an innate love for Hashem. And we call that love the Ava Mesuteres, the concealed love. What does Ava Mesuteres mean? It means that it is one of those, characteristics that we have within us that really only comes out when it is being challenged. What do I mean? So, for example, in our lives, there are many things that we take for granted. So, for example, breathing. Breathing is something that you could take for granted. And so therefore people at times will do things that is dangerous to their life, dangerous to their breathing, and completely ignore what the consequences might be. Why? Because the love that we have for life is something that can often be completely concealed until our life itself is being threatened. And when my life is being threatened, all of a sudden, my feelings towards life and my love of life and my determination to continue living come out, and I'll do anything in my power to make sure that I preserve my life. So the Alter Rebbe says that this is the same idea when it comes to our connection with God, that every person would do anything once they feel that their connection to God is being threatened. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe says, since we have this innate inborn love, therefore, when a person recognizes that every single mitzvah that you do is really part of living, really part of having life that is connected to Hashem, then they will do everything in their power to ensure that they do the mitzvahs, that they fulfill these mitzvahs to strengthen their life of connection to Hashem. And likewise, anytime they're faced with a threat to that connection, which in this case would refer to every negative prohibition, if a person would stop and recognize that by me doing something against the will of Hashem right now, I am threatening my entire connection to Hashem, a person at that point would experience a feeling of panic, a feeling of danger, and would do everything to distance themselves from this danger and not go ahead to do something that would negatively impact their connection with Hashem. And so that's basically the way the Alter Rebbe explains how we can connect to Hashem and do Torah and mitzvahs with feeling of love, that love which is concealed within our hearts at every moment through every mitzvah. And he explains that every mitzvah aseh is connected to the mitzvah of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, this idea of our fundamental belief in the oneness of Hashem, and every negative commandment is associated with ensuring not to violate the prohibition of not having any other power, any other God before Hashem. And as Chassidus explains, the inner meaning of that means that there is not only no other power, no other God, but there is no other significant independent existence from God. And therefore, if we were to raise something that goes against God above our allegiance to Hashem, that would be considered to be a violation of the prohibition of idolatry, of serving other gods. And every Jew would be willing to give up their lives rather than commit the avera of the sin, transgression of worshiping idols. So this is what the Alter Rebbe has explained until now. But now the Alter Rebbe, after he's set down these principles, is coming to address a new issue. And that issue is that sometimes, even though I have an incredible asset, I have my neshama, which is extremely powerful, which has the power to overcome the Yetzer Hara, there are certain side conditions that can sometimes interfere with my ability to win this war. And specifically, we're speaking about sadness and depression. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain over here in chapter 26 that just like we have in our physical reality, that you can have two people, one who's not particularly strong and the other who is extremely strong, and yet this powerful, strong person, if they're feeling sluggish, if they're feeling lazy, if they're feeling sad, then ultimately their strength will do nothing for them because they're not able to move with alacrity, with speed, and this would allow even a weaker person to overpower them. And if you take this analogy and bring it back to our lives, what this is really saying is that there are times that we have what it takes to be able to live a God-fearing life, a life dedicated to Torah mitzvahs, and yet, because of certain side issues, we're feeling down, depressed, dejected, and we're feeling lazy and sluggish. And therefore, when we have those feelings, it is extremely important to find ways to, number one, identify where those feelings are coming from, and then find a way to deal with those feelings, to distance oneself from those feelings, to choose thoughts that can bring a person to an appreciation of why we have so much to be happy. And once a person is able to, again, feel life and feel happiness, then that gives them the power to overcome the Yetzer Hara. So let's start. Paragraph of chapter 26. Baram, however, you see, it says over here, Baram, however, because the Alter, as I've explained, that even though the Alter Rebbe has laid down the principles of how one can overcome all the challenges to the service of Hashem in Torah mitzvahs, nevertheless, there's this issue over here that still needs to be addressed, and that is the issue of sadness and depression. Here we have to lay down and let people know about this fundamental principle. Just like the victory, in order to victor over in a physical case, going, for example, two people, who are struggling with one another, to topple the other down. If one of them is depressed, and is feeling sluggish, is yinutzach bekal v'yipol, he will be victored over, and he will fall. even if he is stronger than his friend. It is exactly the same way when trying to win over the evil inclination in our own lives. So as the Alter Rebbe explained earlier in Tanya, that just like there are two kings who are fighting over one city and each one wants to conquer and to rule over that city, in other words, he wants that the citizens of that city should all conduct themselves in accordance with the wish of the king, everything that it will decree over them. So too, the two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul, are fighting with one another over this small city, which is the body and all its limbs. The godly soul wants what? The godly soul wants that it should be the only one that is controlling over the body. For after all, that's why the soul came down. The soul came down to this world to be able to transform the body and the animal soul, and to transform the place in which we live from being a place where godliness is hidden to a place where godliness and God consciousness is revealed, in that all that exists in the presence of God are following the will of God. That's what the godly soul wants. And then you have, at the same time, the Nefesh Bahamis, who wants the very opposite, and that is to ignore the will of God and do that which a person naturally wants to do for their own selfish reasons and own selfish motives. Now, even though of the two, the animal soul and the godly soul is stronger, however, it is still possible that if one of them, i.e., if the human being who has the godly soul and is and acts as the arbitrator between the two, between the godly and the animal, because ultimately you are the one that has to make the decision. If you're feeling down, depressed, and sluggish, then you are allowing for the animal soul to conquer over the godly soul. And so therefore, it's a Jew who is in a position of feeling lazy and sluggish is not able to overpower the animal soul. And where does this sluggishness and this laziness come from? So the Alter Rebbe says, the sluggishness and the laziness comes from depression or sadness, and when a person is dull like a stone. The heart of a person is dull like a stone. What does that mean? What that means is that when a person is depressed, what we see is it causes them a very low spirit, meaning a person feels dejected, feels despondent. And through this causes a great weakness for his soul, and that in itself, in turn, produces laziness, and you lose all your passion. And we see this in our own lives, that when a person is happy, all of a sudden they have strength to dance, to sometimes act crazy, to be full of vigor. And when a person is sad, they sometimes can't even get themselves out of bed. And this is why it is so important to get to the root of this depression and do everything in your power to get rid of this depression. Now, where is the answer? How can one overpower the Nefesh Bahamis? He says, Ki Bezrizos, the only way to overpower the Nefesh Bahamis, the animal soul, is with Zrizos, with alacrity. Where does alacrity come from? This comes from joy, and an opening of the heart. And being pure and free of all worry and sadness in the world. Because when a person is in a situation and a state of joy and has no worries and no sadness, then what naturally happens is he's empowered, he's impassioned to be able to overcome any obstacle that stands in the way. However, we have a question that the Alter Rebbe is now going to address, and that is that there's a verse in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 14, verse 23, and the Alter Rebbe understands that verse to be saying that there's some type of profit that can come from sadness. And the question is, we've just explained that sadness is a terrible thing, and sadness leads to all kinds of negativity. So how could there possibly be any profit that could come from sadness? And the Alter Rebbe will explain how, even though sadness is a very negative thing, and one should never go out looking for sadness. However, if one does experience sadness, there is one benefit that can come out from sadness. And so to explain this, I'm going to read to you from Learning from the Tanya by Rabbi Steinsaltz, who explains it in a very beautiful way, or very clear way. And he says like this: in itself, even when used for holy purposes, sadness is not healthy, but at times it must be used, just as pathagon may be used to effect an extreme reaction. Once our heart has been saddened by something truly upsetting, and the Alter Rebbe will give the example of by wickedness of sins, and when, as a result, we break the power of evil, then we cleanse ourselves of the falsehood within ourselves. And then we can experience the true joy in which there is no falsehood. By way of example, an emetic, E-M-E-T-I-C, an emetic is not tolerated by one's digestive system, and it is unpleasant to take. But if one's digestive system is blocked with waste matter, such a drug is useful. More precisely, it is not the emetic that is useful, but its action. It helps the body discharge the waste matter. Similarly, after sadness purges our system of its spiritual waste, we come to the next stage, the relief of true joy. And that is the meaning of in all sadness there would be profit. So like any powerful drug, sadness must be carefully controlled and used only in the right way and at the right time. A person must manage his sadness, not the other way around. And the way to accomplish this is to designate specific times in which to allow oneself to be sad. And so here we see that the Alter Rebbe is saying that although sadness is truly a negative and toxic thing, nevertheless, if one at times does experience true sadness, then depending on the situation, depending if the time is right, one can actually utilize that sadness to get rid of any spiritual waste and open one's heart up to a connection with Hashem, as the Alter Rebbe will now explain. So here goes. Omash, because of that which it says in Mishlei, B'chol etzav yemai said that in every sadness there is some profit. Perush, meaning, sheyiyeh eze yisrael u'mayla mezeh, there'll be some type of benefit from this. The Alter Rebbe says, Hinei adrabah. On the contrary, the Alter Rebbe is explaining, Meloshin zeh, from this expression that it says yiyeh, that it will be. So from this mashma, it implies shaha'etzem misad atzmoi, the sadness on itself, in and of itself, ein by maila. It has no quality of itself, of its own. Rak, the only thing is sheyagia v'yaveh mimenu eze yisrael, that what can come out of its action could bring a profit, but not that the sadness itself is a good thing. And the Alter Rebbe now explains what this advantage that could grow out of a true experience of sadness. And he explains what is the profit? The profit that could come, that is hasimcha hamitis b'Hashem elikov, the true joy in Hashem, our God. Meaning, what is true joy? True joy is something that is going to come from something which in truth, in objective reality, and for a Jew, we're talking about Torah reality, is worthy of rejoicing in. And that is a simcha, a joy from the mere fact that a Jew is connected with Hashem, his God. There are times, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, that there are situations where in order to be able to reach that joy, this true joy in the fact that Hashem is your God, to experience that joy, there's a need in first having a true experience of sadness, as the Alter Rebbe is going to explain. And this is what it means, that in all sadness there is profit. We're talking about the joy, it comes from the sadness, true sadness, that comes at appointed times, which means, when we say appointed times, is that you get to choose when to allow this experience to truly take you through and through, because there are times where a person has negative thoughts and feeling, and a Jew has the ability, every person has the ability to be able to banish those thoughts and banish those feelings by replacing them with others. But there are times where when a person is feeling these things already, and it is an appropriate time, that a person can allow themselves to experience this in order to be able to afterwards come to true joy. What is a type of sadness that is appropriate at some times? That is the sadness that comes over one's sins, with a bitter soul and a broken heart. That through this broken heart, a person is able to break through all the things that stand in the way between him and Hashem. And as he explains over here, through this sadness, through a person having a broken heart and a contrite spirit, this is what ultimately leads to freeing oneself and breaking and subjugating the evil forces that are able to grab onto a person when they're feeling this sadness. Through this nishbar ruach hatuma, you're able to break the spirit of impurity, the sitra achra, and the forces of the other side, and is able to penetrate and break through the iron wall and the iron curtain, hamafsekes, which separates between the person and their Father in heaven. Like it says in the Zohar, Al Posuk, on the verse, which is in chapter 51 of Tehillim, Ruach nishbara lev nishbar, etc. It says over there in the verse that the sacrifice for Hashem is a broken spirit. It says a broken spirit and a crushed person. God will not despise. What this means simply is that the spirit that is broken is the person's spirit is broken. And therefore, the simple meaning of the verse is that the appropriate sacrifice to bring before Hashem is a broken spirit and a broken heart of the person. However, the Zohar explains the spirit that is broken does not refer only to the spirit of the person, but rather it refers to the spirit of impurity that is caused by a person feeling bitter and truly sad over their sins. And so therefore what the Zohar is explaining is that the intent of the verse here is that the way to break the spirit of impurity is through a broken heart of a person. And then Yukuyim Boy, will be fulfilled in the person that feels that it's experiencing a broken heart is Reish Dikra, the beginning of the verse. What's over there in Psalm in 51, Pasuk Yud, it says over there, Tashmi'eni Soser Simcha, it will cause me to hear and experience this joy and this happiness. Return to me the joy of your salvation, and a benevolent spirit. And this is the simple reason, the Tikkun Arizal, for the enactment of the Arizal. That the Arizal instituted Loimar to say Mizmor Zeh, this Psalm 51, Achar Tikkun Chatzos, after Tikkun Chatzos, Koydem Alimud, before learning. The Arizal instituted to say this psalm because after Tikkun Chatzos, a person is supposed to get up and they are supposed to then study Torah until morning, and this needs to be done with great joy. And so, in order to do that, the Arizal instituted to read this psalm in order to enable a person to be able to learn Torah now with true joy in Hashem that comes after this sadness. And we will stop here for today.